Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel. On Yirtzeh Hashem today, we will be learning Daf Kuf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, and in Yirtzeh Hashem completing Siman Shin Chaf Gimel. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the top line of Kuf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, Siman Shin Chaf Gimel Sif Ches. Our learning should be a schus for Achedu Kobeis Yisrael, Hanusunim Batzara Bashivya, Ha'imdim Be Bayomu Be Be'abasha, Hamakam Yerachem Aleihem V'Yetziam Yitzara L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira Mishibud L'Geula, Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv V'Nemar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Refuah Shalema for Yeshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malkachana, Yitzchak Ben Sian Ben Dusha, Rivka Bashir Aleach, Havadasa Baserel. They should have a Refuah Shalema B'Sai Shar Chele Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus that the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over Gans Klal Yisrael B'chol Makom Shehem. Okay, says the Mechaber Sif Ches, Kais Sheshasa Bay Einoi Yehudi. If you have a kais, you have a glass, you have a becher that an Einoi Yehudi drank from, Mutter Lahadichai, you're allowed to wash it on Shabbos L'divrei HaKoil according to everyone. Well, where is this halacha coming from? So yesterday in Sif Zayin, we learned an interesting halacha. We learned about a machlokes rishonim, whether or not you're allowed to be tovel a keli on Shabbos. Tfilas kelim. Again, we're not talking about toveling a keli in a mikveh to make it tahor. We're talking about the halacha of tfilas kelim. You bought a brand new keli from an Einoi Yehudi, or you received as a matana a brand new keli from an Einoi Yehudi. It requires tfilas kelim. Are you allowed to be tovel in a mikveh? The shaila centered around the question of, when you tovel a keli, is that called tikkun moneh? It's definitely not real tikkun moneh. The question is, maybe it has the appearance of tikkun moneh. Why? Because before you had a keli that was not usable. It was aser min hadin to use that keli. Now that you would tovel it in a mikveh, now it's mutter to use the keli. So before the keli was not usable, now the keli is usable. Maybe this looks like tikkun moneh, and maybe there's an issur d'Rabbanan here that you're not allowed to be tovel the keli. It was a machlokes rishonim. Now comes along in Sif Ches, the Mechaber has an associated shaila. You have a kais. An Einoi Yehudi drank yayin from that kais. Now, we're going to assume now that we're talking about yayin that's not mavushal. Now we have a kais that has dregs of yayin nesech in the kais. So right now this kais is not usable because it's got dregs of yayin nesech in it. So in order to use the kais, you got to wash it because you have to wash out the yayin nesech. Says the Mechaber, kais sheshasa by Einoi Yehudi. If you have a kais where an Einoi Yehudi drank wine out of this kais, and now you've got yayin nesech inside the kais, mutter lahadichai l'divrei hakoil. Everyone, even the Rush from Sif Zayin, who says that there is a problem of tikkun moneh when it comes to be toveling a keli, over here you're definitely allowed to wash the kais. Now, we can see what the comparison is. Again, here in Sif Ches, you have a kais that is halachically not usable. It's not usable because it has dregs of yayin nesech. So, in a sense, you could see the shaila. You have a kais that's halachically not usable. Now you're going to wash it out to make it usable. So maybe again we have to worry about the shitas harush that this is considered tikkun moneh. Says the Mechaber, no, this is mutter l'divrei hakoil. Let's go to the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Zayin, which is a lengthy Mishnah Berurah, and it's going to take us out of Arachayim into Yeridea, into some halachas of Taruvos. But the beginning of Ois Katan Lamed Zayin is just going to explain the halacha that we just learned. Says the Chavetz Chaim Ois Katan Lamed Zayin, Sheshasa Bay. We're talking about a kais that an Einoi Yehudi drank. What did he drink? He didn't drink Pepsi. Yayin. He drank wine out of this kais. Even though right now, without washing the kais, this kais is not usable. You're not allowed to use it. Why? Because it has dregs of yayin nesech in it. Still in all, even according to the Rush, there's no shaila of tikkun moneh on washing out this kais. Why not? The Chavetz Chaim gives us the very, very beautiful explanation. And the explanation comes from none other than the Rush. So the Rush who said that there is an inyan of tikkun moneh by doing tfilas kelim on a keli, on a new keli, says over here there is no shaila of tikkun moneh. Why? The guf hakli heterhu. Over here, there's nothing intrinsically usher about the kais. Buy a brand new keli that you got from an Eino Yehudi. The kais is usher. The kais is usher until you do tefillas kelim. Over here, the kais is not usher. The kais is perfectly mutter. The problem is the yayin nesech that's inside the kais. You're washing out the yayin nesech. You're not changing the kais. It's the dregs of the yayin nesech in the kais that are rendering it not usable. When you wash out that yayin nesech, you're not repairing the keli. All you're doing is washing it out. So it's as if, let's say you have a kais that's filthy. It fell into the mud. And now it's not usable. It's all muddy. It's disgusting. It's repulsive. Is anyone going to say that there's a shiloh of tikkun moneh to wash out the kais? No. You're not repairing the kais. You're cleaning it. That's not called repairing the kais. You're taking out the schmutz. So too over here. The dregs of yayin nesach are schmutz. You're washing out the schmutz. You're washing out the dirt. You're not fixing the keli. Says the Mishnah Berurah caveat, however, remember, if you know for certain that this kais is not going to be used again during Shabbos, then you're not allowed to wash it. Forget about the problem of tikkun moneh. You're not allowed to wash it because it would be terchi yisera on Shabbos and perhaps hachana. So there's a different reason why you're not allowed to wash it if you're not going to use it. Now, the Mishnah Berurah Bavarns, he points out another question. You might look at this and you might say, wait a second. You have a kais that's not usable because it has dregs of yayin nesech in it. Is there perhaps a muktzah issue over here? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Vafilu hachi, even though you can't use the kais right now until you wash it out, mutal l'tatal hakais af b'loy hadacha. Even if you leave the kais dirty. So you have the kais that the Eino Yehudi drank from. Now, let's say you don't want to wash it because you know that you're not going to use the kais for the rest of Shabbos. So you've got a kais that halachically is not usable because it has dregs of yayin nesech in it, and you know you're not going to use it for the rest of Shabbos, so you don't want to wash it. Is it muktzah? Are you allowed to be metaltal it? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, it's not muktzah. You're allowed to be metaltal the kais even without washing it. Now let's pause here for a second, because now what the Mishnah Berurah is going to do is, the Mishnah Berurah is going to discuss this shaila from the perspective of the halacha of basis ledavar aser. But I want to pause for a second, before we get even to basis. You have a kais that has dregs of yayin nesech in it, so halachically, you're not allowed to drink from it. You're also not going to wash it now because you have no cause to drink from it for the rest of Shabbos. So to wash it, hachana terchi yisera, you're not going to wash it. Are you allowed to go ahead and be metaltal it now, or is it muktzah because it's inherently not usable? So first of all, ein muktzah lachatzi Shabbos. If this wasn't muktzah during Ben Hashmashos when Shabbos came in, it's not going to be muktzah for the entirety of Shabbos. That's one thing. But second of all, the kais is still a keli, and it's still usable as a keli. Maybe you'll fill it up with water, and you'll use it to wash out the sink. There's no problem of doing that. So there are reasons why this kais is not suddenly going to become muktzah machmas gufay. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to discuss this from the perspectives of basis l'davar aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah like this. How about if the Eino Yehudi did not only drink wine from the kais, he did more than that. He had wine in the kais, and he took pieces of challah, and he dipped them into the wine in the kais, and then he ate the challah. Now, not only does the kais have dregs of yayin nesech in it, it has breadcrumbs that are absorbed with yayin nesech in the kais. Why is that a problem? Because now, maybe you look at the kais and you say it's a basis l'davar aser. It's got breadcrumbs in it of iser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Va'afilu yesh b'kais perurei pas sheshara b'Eino Yehudi." Even if there are breadcrumbs inside this kais that the Eino Yehudi soaked in wine, afilu hachi mutal l'taltal lahakais, you're still allowed to be metaltal l'kais. V'lo have a basis l'davar aser, and it doesn't become a basis l'davar aser. Ta'apirurim b'telim l'gabe hakais. Let's remember the underpinnings of the halacha of basis. Now, first of all, I just have to point out, because it just struck me now, the Mishnah Berurah is looking at this from the perspective of basis. You can't create a basis on Shabbos, right? The fact that the Perurim went into the kais on Shabbos is not going to make the kais a basis l'davar ha'aser on Shabbos. So it must be talking about a case where the breadcrumbs were introduced. The guy used this kais before Shabbos, and it had the breadcrumbs in there during the Ben Hashmashos period, and it became a basis during the Ben Hashmashos period. But in any case, it wouldn't be a basis, says the Chavetz Chaim. Why? Because let's remember the underpinnings of the halacha of basis. Why is a basis l'davar ha'aser muktzah? It's because the base item, I always used the example of the bowl that I put my keys in. Because I want the bowl to serve as a holder and a container for my keys, the bowl becomes bottle to my keys. And that's why a basis l'davar ha'aser is muktzah, because it is bottle to the davar ha'muktzah. It is there to serve the davar ha'muktzah. It's bottle to the davar ha'muktzah, and therefore it becomes muktzah, like the davar ha'muktzah. But over here, the kais does not become bottled to the breadcrumbs. Nobody looks at the kais and says, oh, the kais is here to serve the breadcrumbs that have yayin nesach absorbed into them. And now the kais is a basis. No, the crumbs are not choshev. So the kais is not going to be bottled to the crumbs. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says here. He says, "Afilu hachi mutal tatal hakais v'lo have a basis l'davar ha'aser ta pirurim b'telim l'gabi hakais," because the crumbs are bottled to the kais. And now we digress into Yeridea. Says the Mishnah Berurah. We're talking here about shilos of tikkun moneh on Shabbos in the context of when you have something that's aser and you render it mutter. So we saw in Siv Zayin that according to the Rosh, you have a keli that requires tefillah. To go ahead and toivel it is nireh, at least, k'tikkun moneh. It has the optics of tikkun moneh, and therefore the Rosh holds that it is aser. So we have this concept that when you have something which is aser and you render it mutter, that could be a potential issue of tikkun moneh. Now the Chavetz Chaim is going to look at this. He's going to look at several different cases where this might come into play, and they all have to do with the halacha of bittul. When you have something that's aser that's introduced into a mixture, and you want to say that it's bottle, or you want to cause it to become bottle, is there an issue of tikkun moneh? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Kosav Trumas Hadeshen, the Trumas Hadeshen writes, De'ein levatel iser b'Shabbos. You cannot go ahead and cause bittul on Shabbos. You have a mixture, and the mixture has in it something which is aser. Now you want to go ahead and you want to add heter. You want to add more items that are mutter to the mixture in order to cause the davar ha'aser to become bottle. Says the Trumas Hadeshen, you're not allowed to do that. De'en levatel iser b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to cause bittul on Shabbos. De'en lecha tikkun gadol mizeh, because that's a tremendous tikkun. You have a mixture which is halachically aser because it contains a dvar iser in it. There's something aser inside this mixture, so the mixture is aser. Now you want to add in more heter in order to be mavatal the iser and render the mixture mutter. Says the Trumas Hadeshen, you can't do that because elecha tikkun gadol mizeh. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, I don't really understand this Trumas Hadeshen, because the Trumas Hadeshen sounds like he's telling me that I'm not allowed to do something on Shabbos, which I'm not allowed to do during the week either, because there's a rule, ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. The concept of bittul exists when something that's aser fell into a mixture. Now we look at the mixture and we say, what's the ratio of heter to iser? How much heter is there in the mixture? How much iser is there in the mixture? So we all know the magic number of shishim. If you have 60 parts heter against 1 part of iser, so the iser is bottle. So, but this is always a shaila b'di'eved. The iser fell into the mixture. So now we stop everything, and we look at the mixture, and we say, what's the ratio? If the ratio is 60-1, so then the Isser is bottle. And now, okay, go ahead, enjoy the mixture. If you don't have a ratio of 60 heter to 1 part Isser, then the mixture is Asr. And I'm sorry, Charlie, you got to throw it out. You can't use it. It's not mutter. But we never say, oh, you only have 40 parts heter to 1 part heter. We only have 40 parts heter to 1 part Isser. Okay, go ahead and add in another 20 parts of heter, so you should increase the ratio of heter to Isser to 60-1, and you should be mavatal the Isser. No, ain't mavatal in Isser l'chatchila. You're not allowed to go ahead and cause bittul. If the facts on the ground are that the Isser was bottle in the heter, fine. But if the Isser is not bottle in the heter, you can't go build up the heter component of the mixture in order to cause bittul. You're not allowed to do that. So what's the Trumas Hadeshet telling me that you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos? You're not allowed to do it on Monday. What do I care about Shabbos? So again, Kasav Trumas Hadeshet, and Trumas Hadeshet writes, Dein levat elisa b'Shabbos, you cannot bring about bittul on Shabbos. Dein lechotik and godly bizeh. Now, even though we have the Ramah and Yeridei Tzadik Tesivav, Svir Lei who holds, you're not allowed to shum Isser, you're not allowed to cause bittul even on Monday, to bring up the ratio of heter to Isser to 60 parts to 1, Afiluim who is Rabbanon, and you're not even allowed to do it by an Isser Rabbanon. So why is the Trumas Hadeshet telling me that you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos? You're not even allowed to do it on Monday. Mikam Mokim, nevertheless, nafkamina. There is a case where this Trumas Hadeshet is negeya. What's that case? Le'inyin yavesh biyavesh. It's negeya to a mixture of dry items. And you have to add in here that it's also min b'minoi. It's a mixture of like items, shenis arev, that got mixed, chad betray. 1 part Isser into 2 parts of heter. So what are we talking over here? Whenever we talk about hilchos taruvos, the halachas that govern mixtures of Isser and heter, and when we can apply bittul and when we don't apply bittul, and what ratio of heter do we need against Isser in order to bring about bittul, we differentiate between 2 different types of mixtures, at least high level. You can have a mixture of yavesh biyavesh. A mixture of yavesh biyavesh is 2 dry items. And when I say dry, I don't mean that if you touch it, it's not a little bit moist. What I mean is, we're not talking about a stew. We're not talking about a soup. We're not talking about liquid of Isser mixed into liquid of heter, or things that are cooked together with a gravy. We're talking about distinct, relatively dry items. So for example, you have 3 rib steaks. A raw rib steak. You have 3 raw rib steaks. You happen to know that 2 of them are kosher meat, and 1 of them is a treifa rib steak. So somehow a mixture happened over here where you have 2 kosher pieces of meat and a 3rd treifa piece of meat got mixed in. That's a mixture of yavesh biyavesh. That's a mixture of like items. It's min b'minoi, and it's yavesh biyavesh. It's dry items. There's no gravy mixing together over here. There's no liquid mixing together over here. We have 3 distinct items. We have 2 kosher rib steaks and 1 treifa rib steak. Now, in such a mixture, you do not need 60 parts heter against 1 part Isser in order to be mavatal the treifa rib steak. All you need is roiv. You need a majority. Now, in the case that I gave you, you have 2 kosher rib steaks, you have 1 treifa rib steak. Okay, you have roiv. You have 2 kosher against 1 treif. That's roiv. Chad, 1 treifa 1, betray, and 2 against 2 of heter. Now the halacha is that when you have such a mixture, yavesh b'yavesh, the treifa 1 is bottle in a simple roiv. High level. So now, says the Mishnah Berurah, you know when the halacha of the Trumas Hadeshet is going to be negeya? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mikam okem nafkamina le'inyin yavesh b'yavesh shenis arev chad betrei. You have this mixture of yavesh b'yavesh, 1 part iser against 2 parts heter. Now, right now, what would the halacha of these 3 steaks be? Right now, you want to make yourself a steak? You could pick up a steak and you could put it on the grill. And you could make yourself a steak and you could eat it. It might be the treifa steak. The treifa steak is bottle. So you're allowed to take this steak and you're allowed to grill yourself a steak. Okay? But how about if what you want to do is, you don't want to grill a steak. You want to take all 3 pieces of meat and you want to put them in a pot and you want to cook them in a pot in a gravy. You want to cook them all together in a pot with a sauce. Once you do that, it's no longer a mixture of yavesh b'yavesh. Once you do that, now it becomes a mixture of lach belach. Because when you cook it, especially when you cook it inside a gravy, each piece of meat is going to exude moisture. It's going to exude gravy and fat. And that's all going to mix together. Now you have a mixture of lach belach. Now you need shishim. So look what the Mishnah Berurah says. The Mishnah Berurah says like this. What did the Trumas Hadeshin say? Let's do the paper trail here. What did the Trumas Hadeshin say? The Trumas Hadeshin said you're not allowed to bring about bittul on Shabbos because ein lecha tikkun gadol mizeh. The question was, you're not allowed to bring about bittul on Monday. You're not allowed to bring about bittul on Tuesday. Ein mevatel nisa lechatchila. What are you telling me you can't do it on Shabbos? Hilchah Shabbos is not negeya here. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, I'll give you a case where it's negeya. Because there is a case where you are allowed to bring about bittul on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You know what that case is? This case. You have 3 rib steaks. Yavesh b'yavesh. 2 of them are kosher, 1 of them is treif. What's the status of this mixture right now? The status of the mixture right now is all 3 of these rib steaks are allowed to be eaten because the treifa rib steak is bottle in the 2 kosher rib steaks. So right now, if somebody comes and says, are these 3 steaks kosher? The answer is yes. Those 3 steaks are kosher. But now you have a problem. You want to cook them. You're not allowed to cook them. Why? Because in order to cook them, you need shishim. In order to cook them, you need 60 parts heter against the 1 part of iser. If this happens on a Monday, you would be allowed to bring more rib steaks, and you would be allowed to increase the ratio of heter against iser, and you would be allowed to be mevatel the treifa rib steak b'shishim in order to be allowed to put them in a pot and cook them. And the logic is very simple, because this is not mevatel iser lechatchila. You look at these 3 rib steaks on the counter, and they are all kosher, because the treifa one is already bottle chad betrei. Why? Because right now it's a mixture of yavesh b'yavesh. So right now the treifa one is bottle. Now you decide, I want to put them in a pot and I want to cook them. Somebody says, well, that you can't do. Because if you want to put them in a pot and cook them, now you're creating a mixture of lach balach, and now you're going to need shishim. You're going to need 60 rib steaks of heter against the 1 rib steak of treif. Oh, you know what I could do? I could go bring more rib steaks and build it up to shishim. Why? Because I'm not being mevatel iser. There's no iser here. I'm doing it before I put it in a pot. And before I put it in a pot, it's yavish b'yavish, it's batal chad b'trei. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you would be allowed to do this. But on Shabbos, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Now, Shabbos, l'chayra, it wouldn't be negeya anyway, because Shabbos you're not allowed to cook. But on Yom Tov, it would be negeya, because Yom Tov you're allowed to cook. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Trumas Hadeshin is telling me that on Yom Tov you would not be allowed to do that. Why? Because that would be called tikkun maneh. Now, it's interesting. It's tikkun maneh even though you're not really bringing about bittul. That's why it's mutter. That's why it's mutter during the week. Because it doesn't run afoul of the rule of ein mevatel nisa lechatchila. But yet on Yom Tov you're not allowed to do it because of tikkun maneh. Inside, says the Mishnah Berurah, Mikamokim nafkiminali nin yavish b'yavish and isarav kad betray. This halach of the Trumas Hadeshin is neged to a mixture of taruvis of yavish b'yavish where you have a simple roiv, you have 1 part iser against 2 parts heter. The bechol yachal lahaisef alav ad shishim. During the week, you would be allowed to build up the ratio of heter and bring it up to shishim kedei levashloi achakach, so that then you could take the whole mixture, put it in a pot, and cook it together. Kedei isa b'yardei simin koftes u'b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov also b'shum demikri misakin. But on Shabbos or Yom Tov, and it's not really negayah to Shabbos, on Yom Tov this would be also because it would be called tikkun maneh. Vehecha demikli kali isura shari kamashakasa b'sibit tafkav zayin sif beis. This is another interesting tidbit that the Mishnah Berurah throws in here. He says there is a case that you would be allowed to do this on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. There's a halacha that if you have a mixture of iser and heter, and you want to be mevatel the iser, right? Ein mevatel is a lechatchila, right? But there is another case where you're allowed to be mevatel is a lechatchila. Let's say it's Yom Tov. Now, on Yom Tov, you're allowed to make a fire. So firewood is not muktzah on Yom Tov. So you have a fire pit outside, and it has firewood in it, right? And no problem. You're allowed to go ahead and burn this firewood. It's not muktzah, and you're allowed to make a fire on Shabbos. Of course, you have to have all the halachas of HaTorah. You can't start a new fire. You have to start it from an existing fire, etc., etc. But now an interesting thing happened. A branch fell off a tree, and the branch landed in your fire pit. Now that branch is muktzah, because that branch was attached to the tree when Yom Tov started. It's b'mechuber. So that's muktzah. Now what do? You want to make a fire in the fire pit, but you have muktzah wood in the fire pit. The halacha is you're allowed to bring more non-muktzah firewood, and you're allowed to add it to the fire pit in order to be mevatel the muktzah wood. Why? I thought ein mevatel in this lechatchila. Yeah, but there's an exception here. You know why? Because we learned in Hilchas Yom Tov, when you burn wood, when do you get the hana of the wood? You get the hana after it's burnt. How does wood produce heat? As the fire consumes the wood gives off heat. It's the destruction and the consumption of the wood by the fire that generates the heat. So the hana that you only get after the Dvar Isser is destroyed. Therefore, there's a loophole that in such a case, you're allowed to be mevatel the firewood. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is mentioning over here. Next halacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Umuter l'sha'er shishim, afilu nis'arev be'erev Shabbos, v'loi noidoloi ad Shabbos. Okay. Let's say you have a taruvis. You have a mixture of iser and heter. And you want to know, is this mixture mutter or is this mixture aser, right? So you have to analyze it and you have to paskin. You have to look at it and you have to say, do I have shishim? Do I have 60 parts heter against 1 part of iser? Or is it only maybe 40 parts heter against 1 part iser? So you have to be mishayir and you have to paskin on the mixture and decide, is it mutter or is it aser? Is there an aspect of tikkun maneh here? Now, we have a precedent for such a shaila, and that is by a bechor. When you have an animal that's a bechor, a firstborn animal, so a bechor of a kosher animal, right, it really has to be given to the kohen. You're not allowed to shecht, you're not allowed to eat it. But if it's a bal mum, you are allowed to. Who has to decide on the mum? Who has to paskin the shaila of the mum? A kohen. Kohen is not allowed to go ahead and paskin the shaila on a bechor if it's a bal mum or not on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Why? Because it's tikkun maneh. So the Chavetz Chaim is bringing up the question over here. When you want to analyze a mixture and decide, do I have 60 parts heter against the iser or not? Is there an aspect of tikkun maneh here? Are you allowed to do this or not? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Umuter l'sha'er shishim, you're allowed to analyze a mixture and decide if there's shishim, afilun is arev be'erev Shabbos v'loi noidoloi ad Shabbos. Even if the mixture happened before Shabbos, but you didn't realize the problem until Shabbos, you're allowed to go ahead and analyze it and paskin, and it's not a problem of tikkun maneh. The implication of the Mishnah Berurah is that if the mixture took place, if the mixture happened before Shabbos, and you could have analyzed it before Shabbos, and you were just neglectful, and you just didn't bother, then on Shabbos you would not be allowed to. That's what the Pri Megadim says. V'dafka l'shar b'dasav amari einov. But over here, you could only be mishayar by looking at it and calculating in your head, and by looking with your eyes. Halimdoi loy. But you can't start measuring, because medida, measuring, is also on Shabbos. Avagav de medida de mitzvah shari, even though we said that medida for tzarchei mitzvah is mutter, and over here, if you're doing it, let's say, for Sudas Shabbos or something, so it should be a mitzvah. If you're going to start measuring with your hands and everything else, now it really looks like tikkun maneh, and therefore it would be also. Kosav Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, Yavesh b'yavesh shenis ariv chad betray. Again, let's say we have a taruvis, we have a mixture of heter and iser, and we have yavesh b'yavesh. So again, it's our slices, let's say, of meat that got mixed in, and you have chad betray. You have one treifa slice of meat that got mixed in with two kosher slices of meat. So now there's an interesting machlokes, I guess you would say, in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Deah in Siman Kuf Tes. The Mechaber brings down in Siman Kuf Tes in Yoreh Deah a yesh oisrim. He brings down a shita that's machmer and says like this: you have a mixture, yavesh b'yavesh, chad betray. Okay? You have dry items, you have slices of meat, you have one tray for one, you have two of heter. We said that yavesh b'yavesh, min b'minoi, is bottle in a simple roiv. So right now the halacha is all three pieces of meat are mutter. So a person could go grill one steak and eat it, grill the second steak and eat it, grill the third steak and eat it, because they're all mutter. Because yavish b'yavish, chad betray, it's bottle. But the Mechaber brings down a yesh oisrim. The Mechaber brings down a shita that says that one person should not eat all three pieces. Because if one person eats all three pieces, then we know for certain that he ate the piece that was aser. But what if two people eat all three pieces? Well, if Reuven eats two of the pieces and Shimon eats the third piece, then each one could say, Reuven could say, I don't know that I ate the tray for one. I ate two. I know that there were two kosher ones here. Shimon could say, I don't know that I ate the tray for one. There were two kosher ones here. I only ate one. So for two people to consume all three pieces is mutter, even according to the Yesh Oisrim. But the Yesh Oisrim says for one person, for Reuven or Shimon, to eat all three pieces, that's aser. Because then we know for certain that he ate iser. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Comes along the Ramah, and the Ramah is machmir a little bit more. The Ramah says, in such a case, yavesh b'yavesh chad betray, we should take one piece and we should throw it out. We shouldn't let anybody eat it. Why? Because by throwing out one piece, we could always say that the treifa piece was thrown out. And now, whoever consumes the other two, we could say that they only consumed heter. They didn't consume iser. So that's the back and forth that we have in Yoreh Deah, Siman Kuf Tes. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, how is this negeh to us? Kosev Magen Avram, the Magen Avram says, the yavish b'yavesh and asarav chad betray. When you have this type of mixture, yavish b'yavesh, you have one piece of iser and two pieces of heter. Mutter lahashlich echad mehen lahater ha'acherim. You could take one and you could throw it away, like the Ramah says you should do. You could take one and throw it away. So now the other two are perfectly mutter, and somebody could sit down and chow down on the other two. And it's not a problem of tikkun maneh. Why? Because this Ramah that says that you should take one piece and throw it away, that's a chumrah. The Medina kol she'ein nechel la'adam echad shari. Because even according to the Yesh Oisrim of the Mechaber, who says that one person shouldn't eat all three, But all three definitely could be eaten if they're eaten by two different people. Like I said, if Reuven eats two and Shimon eats one, even the Yesh Oisrim of the Mechaber says that that's mutter. So the idea of throwing away one that the Ramah says is a chumrah. Since it's only a chumrah, we can't call it tikkun mana. Al kain lo yehav ezeh k'mesakin. Another Yeridei halacha. Sakin treifa. You have a knife that was used to cut something that was treif. And now, this knife is shmutzik, it's dirty, from treif. So it was used to cut treifa meat, and it has fat from treifa meat on it now. Now, the meat that you cut was cold. Somebody cut cold treifa meat with a knife. Now, the knife is shmutzik, it's dirty from treifa meat. But there's no shiloh of blias over here. You don't have to kasher the knife because it was all cold. So the knife didn't take in any blias of treifas. So sakin treifa, im roitza lachtich by lechem. If now you want to take that knife and you want to cut challah, the chadaima, you want to cut something else, b'tzainin, and this is all with cold, the boy hadacha. The halacha is that before you use this knife, you have to wash it very well. The mashma shifsha heitev, lo yadacha ba'alma. It's not enough to just wash it. You need to scrub it. Ein lasa izeh b'Shabbos, dehevikim esakin. The Pri Megadim says, since this knife requires a very significant washing, it requires shifshuf. To do that would be considered tikkun maneh, and that would be aser on Shabbos. Okay, moving along to Sifteh, second line down in the Shulchan Aruch, says the Mechaber. Speaking about scrubbing, says the Mechaber, mutar l'shafshef hakelim b'chol davar. You're allowed to scrub kelim on Shabbos using any kind of abrasive materials. I don't want to, it says over here b'chol davar that you're allowed to scrub dishes and kelim with anything. We have to remember that that's very high level. You're not allowed to use a sponge, because if you use a sponge, you're going to come up with schita issues. He's talking over here about abrasives. You're allowed, the Mechaber is saying, you want to scrub a keli and you want to use some kind of abrasive substance. The Mechaber is telling you you're allowed to do this with anything, chutz, with the exception of clay kesef, if you're polishing or scrubbing silver, begartikon, with a substance called gartikon. What's gartikon? Says the Mechaber shu shmare yayin. These are sediments of wine. Kishenis yavshu, when they dry out, viniskashu, and they get hard. And apparently this is a substance which is highly abrasive. And therefore you're not allowed to scrub soft silver with this gartikin, mipneshu memachek likli kesef shuhurach, because it will have the effect of smoothing or polishing. Essentially, that's what polishing is, you should know. Polishing really is taking off a layer. So when you go ahead and you polish silver, which is a soft metal, with this gartikon, which is highly abrasive, you're going to come up with a problem of memachek. The isser of memachek is smoothing something out. You're going to be smoothing the silver. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you're allowed to scrub kalim with anything. Afilu ben neser v'choil. You're even allowed to use something called neser, which was an abrasive, v'choil, or you could use coarse sand. Now, you might think that neser and choil are substances which should be muktzah makmas gufay. Sand outside on the ground is muktzah makmas gufay. It's the highest level of muktzah. You're not allowed to go outside and touch sand, and moves you can touch. You're not allowed to be metaltal sand. So the Mishnah Berurah reminds us, this is talking about kishayichet lehem mokaim miba'ayom she'ena muktzah. It's talking about where you are making this sand. You prepared it before Shabbos. Now with sand, we said it's not enough to just be making it. You have to be making it, you have to prepare it for Shabbos use, and you have to designate a place in the house to put it. You have to put it in a specific place and say this sand is muchan for Shabbos. Why? Because if you just dump it down anywhere on the floor, we're going to say it's bottled to the earthen floor and it would be muktzah anyway. Menira and the Mishnah Berurah says it would appear that dafka kishay achol megubal b'mayim erev Shabbos. If we're talking about scrubbing kalim with sand, well, the implication is that we're using sand as an abrasive, and we're also going to use water. Now, when you mix water and sand, you form mud. Forming mud could be an issue of lush. You're kneading, right? You're taking a dry substance, grains of sand, and you're mixing them together, you're being megabel them by joining them together with a liquid agent, with mayim. So now the Mishnah Berurah is cautioning us against the problem of lush. We must be talking about a case where the sand was already mixed with water from Erev Shabbos. Or what you're doing is, you're doing a dry scrubbing. You're taking sand without water, and you're scrubbing the kalim just with dry sand. Or maybe the other way. Or you're pouring so much water into the sand that it's not going to form like a thick mud. It's just going to be a liquidy mess. So there's no lush. Because if you don't employ one of these methods, is cut nun. You're allowed to handle sand with wet hands, even though you might cause some little bit of lush. We'll see that Mir Hashem, Bez Hashem Yisbarach in Siman Shin. Wait a second, in Shin Chavav, yeah. Even though by using these abrasive substances, it is possible that you might cause some level of memachik, or you might smooth out the surface of the kalim that you're cleaning. It's a davar miskaven. You just want to clean the kalim. You don't want to smooth it out. And if it happens, it's not a psik ratio, therefore it's mutter. Aval gartakon have a psik ratio, but to use gartakon on silver, that's a psik ratio of mamachik, and that's why it's aser. The Maharil had a very interesting chumrah. He said that you're not allowed to clean glass. Apparently they would use some kind of mixture of water and oats in order to clean glass. And the Maharil said that this was aser because you're shining it. The Mishnah Berurah says we need a reason why the Maharil says this is aser. Maybe the Maharil holds that there's a difference between cleaning kalim and shining kalim. Cleaning kalim is not tikkun maneh, but maybe shining up a keli, maybe that is tikkun maneh. Maybe the Maharil holds you're not allowed to shine a keli, but the Mishnah Berurah says v'doichik, this is a doichik. The Mechaber said you're allowed to clean kalim except for cleaning silver kalim with this gartakon. Ushar kalim afil b'gartakon nami shari. Other types of kalim you're even allowed to scrub with gartakon. It's only soft silver that you're not allowed to clean with gartakon. And why are you not allowed to do that? Because to scrub soft silver with gartakon would be a psik ratio of mamachik, where you're going to smooth out the silver. Interesting halacha, says the Mishnah Berurah. This is why, one of the reasons why you're not allowed to sharpen a knife on Shabbos, even if you're not using a grindstone or a sharpening stone. Rak be'etz v'chadoime. Even if you're sharpening the knife just on a piece of wood. So you're not doing it kedarkon. This is definitely would be with a shinu. You don't sharpen a knife with wood. You sharpen a knife with a whetstone or with a grindstone. You don't do it with a piece of wood. But even to do it with a piece of wood would be also, says the Mishnah Berurah, the doimel mamachek, because the Pri Megadim says that is at least nirek mamachek. It looks, because what do you do when you sharpen a knife? You smooth out the edge. That's the scent, right? How do you tell if a knife is sharp? You feel it for nicks. So that means that when you're sharpening, you're taking out the nicks. You're smoothing it out. Memachek 101. Okay, let's finish off the Siman. Sif Yud, says the Mechaber, Ein chayfefin kalim b'melach. You're not allowed to scrub kalim using salt. Well, think about it for a minute. Kosher salt, coarse salt, is definitely an abrasive. So you might want to take a handful of coarse salt and use it to scrub a keli. Says the Mechaber, Ein chayfefin kalim b'melach. You're not allowed to do that with salt. Why? Actually, if you chazard, it's because of a halacha that we learned earlier. Because when you take salt and you scrub with it with water, the salt breaks down and it liquefies. And the Mechaber in the Mishnah Berurah told us earlier, we had the Aruch HaShulchan that says he doesn't understand this, and nowadays it's not the Metzius. We learned earlier that you're not allowed to take snow or ice and crush it up with your hands on Shabbos. Why? Because you're being moilid mayim. It looks like a malacha. It looks like you're making water. Right now, you don't have water. You have snow and you have ice. But by being marasik it, by crushing it up with your hands, you're suddenly creating water. And we said that looks like a malacha. And therefore, you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. And we learned the halacha over there that you're not allowed to take salt. And you're not allowed to be marasik salt. Because when you crush up salt, the Mishnah Berurah told us it releases water. So it's just as bad, it's the same isser as crushing up snow or crushing up ice. Again, the Aruch HaShulchan said we don't see that mitzias nowadays. If you take a handful of kosher salt and you rub it together, we don't see that it creates mayim. But that's the halacha that the Mechaber is referring to here. Ein chayfin kelim melech, you're not allowed to scrub a keli with salt. Levisha melech nimche, because the salt will melt and break down and it will turn to water. Kishachayfef bechaska, when you do this with kayach. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this would be similar to crushing up snow or hail. Hamavur b'siman shin chafsiv test that it's aser. Ayin sham hatam b'Mishnah Berurah is kat lam and gimel, where we said it's because it's daima to a malacha because you're creating water. Valkein, therefore, kasra paiskim, the paiskim right, the dafka lochuf ba'melech officer, it's only officer to scrub with the salt. Aval mutter litein hamelech lahamayim, but you would be allowed to add salt to water, shemediech behem kelim, if you want to wash dishes, so you have a basin with water in it, ready to wash the dishes, you could add salt to the water. And then you could use the water to wash the dishes. Even though once you add the salt to the water, the salt is going to melt. That's mutter. K'moisham, just like we learned over there in Shimchaf, the mutter liten hasheleg l'seichamayim. You're allowed to put snow or ice cubes into water, alpha pisha nimcha memela, even though on its own it's going to melt, ve'ein choshish, and that is not aser. That brings us to the end of Siman Shin Chav Gimel. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discuss of Limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnasa, and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Biaskel Tzedek, B'meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.